Sometimes people enter into this process and they're very confused as to why everything happened. Sometimes it's very clear why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
You said they can look back and see that's how I allowed myself to get into a very bad situation, and they
Right.
can hopefully learn from that moving forward. So
Yeah.
I again, it's a legal process, but I do hope and think it does provide some healing to people.
Yeah. And I'm just curious too, because I have no idea. So when a person decides that they want to be a lawyer, they want to go into law, you can either go civil law, you can go to, real estate law, like canon law. Is that how it's laid out, or how does that work?
So for people in Canada and the United States, it's really they're seeking out canon law specifically.
Okay.
You, first of all, to study canon law, you need some background in theology because again, canon law is an expression of our theology, the church's theology. So you can't really understand the law unless you know what the church teaches on
Mm,
marriage,
yeah.
sacraments. So people have to have that background already. Then a lot of times they're invited to think about studying canon law. And there's more and more, though, lay people or just people in general getting interested in serving in the church in that way
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that canon law is an area of need in the church.
Dishonesty, disrespectful, discrimination, detached, dismissive. That's it. I'm done. Relationships can be messy. Are you having trouble with your personal or professional relationship? Not to worry. As a relationship therapist and coach for over 25 years, I have a lot to share, and so will my guest experts. Let's get smarter in our business and personal lives so we can be our best selves. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hey, everyone, welcome back to my show. Today on the Luella Young Show, I'm sitting down with Michael Podhajsky, a canon lawyer who helps people find healing and direction within the Catholic Church. I seeked out Michael on LinkedIn because I thought being Catholic myself, being married for almost 28 years, and having some, I mean, obviously, I've helped people through divorces, and I have family that's been through divorces, friends, etc. But I know very little about annulments. So that's why I wanted to have Michael on so he can sort of clear some of the mystery around this. Now, most of his work involves walking with individuals who are seeking annulment or trying to understand their rights, within the church, right? And but what struck me about Michael is how deeply he cares about people, not just the legal side of things, which is, of course, important for us to know, but also the way he leads them emotionally and spiritually in their well being. Um, let's face it, because you're moving through one of life's hardest chapters, right? So he brings a grounded and compassionate approach to situations that can feel very confusing and very painful, but reminding us that canon law at its heart is meant to serve people and ultimately draw them closer to Christ. So, with that, I'm going to start by a very simple question, Michael. What is an annulment?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. There are a lot of people who, including many Catholics, who really have no idea what
Mhm.
annulments are or canon law is or anything like that. So it's always good to get information out there for people. So to understand what an annulment is, formally called a declaration of nullity, we first need to recap a bit of Catholic theology about the sacraments.
Mm-hmm.
So the Catholic Church believes that when a sacrament is celebrated, something real happens. So when someone is baptized, it's not just a symbolic action. There is something real that is imparted to the person's soul, a character. It's called the baptismal character. when the Mass is celebrated. Bread and wine are truly changed into the body and blood of Christ. So too, when a marriage is celebrated, the church believes that something real is created between the parties, this sacramental bond. It's sometimes referred to as the marital covenant,
Mhm.
um, but that this is a real thing. So what happens is when a marriage fails for whatever reasons, in order for people to be able to remarry in the church, they need an annulment, which means not that the church goes back and declares that that marriage is over, but it looks at the moment of consent to see if something was off, if something was missing, so that that sacramental nature of the relationship, did it actually form or not? If it
Mhm.
never formed, then the persons were never married sacramentally. Uh,
Mhm.
it doesn't it doesn't discount the relationship. It doesn't discount any number of things. It's looking only at the sacramental nature, the marital covenant, did that form or not? And
Mhm.
so if it didn't form, then a declaration of nullity for the marriage or an annulment is granted, indicating that that marriage, while it may have had many good things about it, the sacramental character of it didn't form, and so the person is then free to marry, because obviously, as the Lord says in the gospel, that what God has joined together, no human being must separate. So we, the church, doesn't have the power to separate marriages, but we can through a judicial process, which is why canon law is involved. Look at, did the marital bond, the covenantal bond, form or not?
Now, can you give us an example of where someone would come to you thinking that it was a true sacramental bond, but after speaking with you, they discover maybe almost a bit relieved that it wasn't actually a true marital union?
That's an interesting question. Most of the people who come to me are people who have been through a divorce or are in the process of getting a divorce. And so they're looking at sort of this final piece of the process in terms of the relationship has ended, everything is now sort of ending, and now how do they address that in terms of their faith and the Catholic Church? Sometimes this all happened years ago, and sometimes they're in the middle of it. So usually people are looking at not so much was that a valid marriage or not, or they're looking at how do I have this marriage annulled so I can move forward in life.
Okay, so like yeah, like that's a good word, valid, because I think I don't know if it was like I was speaking to a priest who was trying to explain it to me at one time, but something along the lines of let's say you and your spouse were married and you were, 20, whatever, very young. And he did not share with you let's say an addiction that he had, like a whatever, either that be whatever addiction it is, but it's a severe addiction.
Mhm.
So he didn't make you aware of that prior to the marriage. You only found out about it after being married. So I think in that sense, the priest might say, it wasn't a valid marriage because let's say, I mean, it's a sin, right? It's dishonesty on the part of the spouse who didn't dispose, I mean, or disclose the addiction, and also that person who is the addict is basically um, practicing adultery, right? In the sense of idolatry, I should say, in the sense of, idolizing a substance before God and being dishonest to his spouse be because of that.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's sort of the way it was sort of explained to me. And that way, the church would at least grant the annulment on that basis. Like that would be one example. Does that make sense?
It does. And so I want to emphasize again, when we talk about a marriage not being valid, we're only talking about the sacramental nature of the marriage. It's very hard for a lot of people. They come into this process and they think the church is going to invalidate their
Yeah.
whole experience, and they would say, "Well, no, there was real love there for a period of
Yeah.
time,
No.
beyond a period of time," and so we're not invalidating any of that. We're not invalidating whether there was a commitment, whether there was love, whether there was any number of things. The church is only interested at looking at did the sacramental bond, the marital covenant, did it form or not? Was that valid or not? And so your question sort of leads into then what are the grounds or the reasons why the
Hmm.
church could say that that bond formed or not. And it's not just because someone had a bad marriage. It's not just because someone is a faithful Catholic and we feel bad for their situation. The canon law lays out a number of reasons why someone was at the moment of consent. So it all hinges around when the couple exchanges consent, did they between themselves form that bond or not?
So when you say consent, you're saying their vows to one another.
Correct.
Yeah, in front of a witness. Yeah.
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 Right. Because every sacrament, as I mentioned before, canon law is based on church theology.
Hmm.
So we can't understand canon law unless we know church theology. So the sacraments come about because there is a minister who uses the right words and the right things to perform a sacrament. And
Hmm.
theology is called form and matter. But all that really means is that there's certain words that need to be said and certain things that need to be present. In the case of it's not the priest who unites the husband and wife together. It's the couple who are the ministers of the sacrament.
Mm.
So it's by their intention, their expressing of legitimate vows, and the stuff that has to be present is a man and a woman. So it's by having those things present that the sacramental bond is formed. So if something is missing, um, an obvious example here for the church would be if there are two men or two women expressing vows, the right stuff or the right matter isn't there. So that would be an invalid marriage, even if they had the right intention and the right words, the right form. If a husband and wife or spouse, or at that time fiancés, come together and they don't have the right form, the right intention, the right words, that would that could invalidate the marriage, that could prevent the marital bond from forming.
Okay. Okay. So if I'm getting this right, so I mean, a husband and wife with all good intentions are married in the church. They make their vows, they give their consent. Years pass and they realize they're not it's not working out. And then they um do they typically reach out, like is it only when they want to remarry that they go for an annulment? I guess that's the only reason to get an annulment, or do some people simply after being divorced and of Catholic faith, like would they just choose to get an annulment even without the idea of remarrying? Does that happen as well?
Yes, it does. The motivations for people to seek an annulment, again, formally called the declaration of nullity, sort of covers the gambit of reasons. Sometimes it's because they want to get married. Sometimes it's because they have remarried civilly and they want to reconcile with the church. Sometimes they just want to have this whole relationship behind them in the past. They don't have any particular desire at the moment, anyone lined up to marry, but they want to have that chapter of their life behind them as part of the process for closing that and moving forward.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so saying that then, what is the process for an annulment?
So the process is so I should say it's a again we're talking about canon law. We're talking about a judicial process. So the process is someone has to petition their usually it's their local tribunal, the place where they're living. Um, the law gives a couple of different options for where they can petition, but you petition a tribunal. You have to present some basic preliminary information to show who the parties were, to show that there's, a possibility that an annulment might be granted. Um, and then the tribunal will accept the case, and the tribunal is formed. So depending on the case, depending on the location, sometimes it's a panel of three judges, sometimes it's a single judge. It all depends on different circumstances. And then, so the judges or judge then start collecting evidence. And the evidence in a canonical trial is, and particularly in an annulment case, is a bit different than what we're used to seeing on TV with criminal cases where they're looking for, fingerprints and smoking weapons and all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. It all hinges on what did the parties intend to do? What did they know? What was their psychological state at the moment when they exchanged their vows?
Okay.
And through examining all of that by the participation of both parties have a right to be involved in the process because the marriage obviously involved both of them. And then the parties can nominate witnesses on their behalf to offer testimony. That's the evidence that's collected. And then once all the evidence is collected, then the judges will come together, review everything, and make a decision about whether or not the marriage was valid sacramentally.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so do you have to appear in person? Like as you say that, I'm thinking, do I have to be standing up there in front of a judge, like presenting my evidence that, this I deserve an annulment?
But again, that will vary greatly depending on the tribunal. Some tribunals do everything through written questionnaires. So
Okay.
some tribunals, you will go and meet with your local pastor. The tribunal will send your pastor questionnaires, and your pastor will help you fill out everything and send it back in. Um,
Mm,
and they'll send questionnaires to your witnesses. The witnesses will fill them out, send them back
mm,
in. Other tribunals will conduct phone interviews with people,
mm,
and some tribunals like people to come in person and be interviewed, sometimes by the judge, sometimes they have someone else appointed to do the interviews. Um, but again, that all depends on the particular case and the tribunal and how they operate. But it's not this scary thing where you walk into some big
court.
courtroom.
Yeah.
It's usually you come into someone's office and you sit down and you have a conversation with someone
Yeah.
about what happened. It's not the church is not interested in these cases about assigning blame to
No.
anybody. The church is interested in finding out what happened. What's the
Hmm.
truth of this
Hmm.
marriage? What's the truth of the consent? Did the consent form the marital bond or not?
Hmm. Okay. Do you you are in the States and I'm in Canada. Do you know much about there being much of a difference between the two countries in the process?
I don't know that there's no, I don't know that there's much of a difference
Okay.
between the United States and Canada. It really it varies more just from tribunal to tribunal
Okay.
on what personnel they have available for these cases and how they feel it's best to collect evidence.
Okay. And like just so the audience is clear, What's the definition of a tribunal?
A tribunal is a court.
A
Uh,
court.
yeah, so it's
Okay.
just a tribunal is just another name for a court. And tribunals will often refer to themselves as the court. So there's really no distinction between court or tribunal. Um, and the tribunal, again, is made up of it's either one judge or a panel of three judges. There's always a defender of the bond appointed to every case, whose job it is to protect the dignity of marriage, so that this is a fair process and the church isn't just granting annulments for everybody because we
Yeah.
want people, but that we're doing it because there are legitimate grounds present and they've been proven. So the defender of the bond argues in favor of the validity of the marriage. And then there's always a notary, just someone who verifies the authenticity of the acts. So it's not a lot of personnel, it's just a small number of people. And typically, when people participate in an annulment process, they're dealing with one, maybe two people at their local tribunal.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Okay, so if simply because I'm Catholic, do I need an annulment? Like yeah, like what's who needs an annulment, who doesn't?
So the short answer is no, you don't need an annulment. If you've been divorced, you're still a Catholic in good standing with the church. You're still able to receive all of the sacraments.
Okay.
There's no sort of black mark against you and anything like that. The only reason you would need an annulment is if you are Catholic and want to get married again in the church, or if you are anybody and you've been previously married and you want to marry a Catholic, then even
Hmm.
those would need to get an annulment before they can marry a Catholic person.
Okay, interesting. So the person that I want to marry, remarry, I guess, to, if he is an atheist or a Protestant or something, um, they have to seek, what do they need to seek? What do they need to?
So they would need to seek the same thing, an annulment. So the church recognizes that people outside of the Catholic Church can validly enter into a marital covenant. We get the word covenant from our Jewish ancestry from
Yeah,
the Old Testament.
yeah.
So, you know, people of any religion or even no religion can form valid marital bonds between themselves. Again, it's the people who bring about the bond, the marital covenant. It's not the priest or the deacon. So the church recognizes that people can do this according to their own religion and according to their own religion's laws, which most other religions don't have a lot of laws on that. So it's
Hmm.
wide open. Um, but if they have the right intentions, they can form valid marital bonds. And so the church has to, again, for the sake of the gospel and that you can't remarry if you're previously married, the church has to analyze, adjudicate that marriage to see is that a valid marital bond or not? Is that person free to marry again?
Okay, okay. So that person needs to get an annulment, but would that annulment entitle or entail that person to be baptized as a Catholic, or am I getting too complicated here?
No, it wouldn't. No, they if they're baptized in any other Christian faith, they would have to go through the same process. Even if they're not Catholic, they might have to go through the same process. Uh,
Okay.
Jewish or something, again, we recognize that people can form these marital covenants between themselves according to their own religious beliefs and their religion's laws. So the church would use their laws, their religious laws, to analyze their marriage if they have any. Most non-Catholic Christians don't have any laws on marriage. If they're Orthodox, they might. Um, but yeah, so the church recognizes the right of everyone to marry, and so the church would have to uh, adjudicate that marriage to make sure that that person is free to marry now in the church.
Okay. Okay. And that's the really the work of the canon lawyer to bring that law, like to sort of combine the sacrament with the law. Does that make sense?
Right. Well, so the law, in this sense, canon law is at the service of the sacraments. So canon
Okay.
law is laying out what is needed for the sacraments to be celebrated and to be celebrated validly and properly.
Hmm.
Um, if they're not Catholic, other religious denominations may have some laws of their own, which would lay out what is needed to be married validly and properly according to their beliefs. If they're in another religion, their religion may have certain laws or beliefs about what is needed to be married validly or properly. So the church would use any of those depending on the person who's coming to them. Most often it's um, Catholics and Christians, because there's so much intermarriage now,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that people are marrying non-Catholic Christians. And with the divorce rates such as they are, it's pretty common that someone who is a Christian but not Catholic has been married, divorced, and so the church would need to adjudicate their marriage to see if that was a valid marriage or not.
Okay. Okay. There's so many more questions I can ask you, but I want to make sure to get through some of the most important ones. How much would something like this cost a person?
It's a good question. It's asked all the time. There's no easy way to answer that because that varies widely depending on the tribunal and where they live. But I would say they would expect to pay several $100s. It could be a lot more, it could be a lot less. I think there may be some tribunals that pay for all the costs themselves, so it's no cost to the individual.
Okay.
And certainly, if there are financial hardships,
Mm-hmm.
the tribunal will lower costs or maybe even waive fees because the church doesn't want people to be prevented from having access to canon law and the sacraments because of financial means. But it does take a lot of money to process these cases, the
Yeah.
personnel and everything else that's involved, which is why the church asks that people pay a portion of the fees. I don't know that there's any tribunal that asks people to pay like the full amount of what it would actually cost, but it's typically several $100s. And
Okay.
if they want to or need to hire a canon lawyer, it's going to be even much more than that.
Okay. All right. So, how long it's like would something like this take typically? I know that's a tough question too, but
Yeah. Again, there is a lot depending on the tribunal, depending on the case, but people should really expect a year or more. I know there's some tribunals that are able to get it done in a lot less time. That would depend on the case and how quickly they can gather information and the evidence they need. But a year to year and a half is probably pretty typical for most of the tribunals that I'm familiar with.
wow, it's long enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you think of it, like from the time that you realize your marriage is, in disrepair, then I know even to get a divorce, they do not want you to sign anything legal for a good year. So that you have a year to wait in separation, then the divorce, go through that, then the annulment process. Like, yeah, it could be like two years at least from the time, yeah, you're even thought about ending one marriage and going into another. But honestly, I think it's good. Um, time. can be very beneficial for things like this, I think. So,
And you bring up a good point in that to even begin a case, most every tribunal is going to wait until the civil divorce is final before they even
mm,
begin an annulment case.
mm-hmm,
And that's for two reasons. One is because there is a requirement in canon law that before the tribunal proceeds forward in analyzing whether the marriage was valid or not, they need to do everything possible to make sure that the marriage is beyond repair. So
mm-hmm,
that primary instinct as Catholics, as the church, is to support marriages
mm-hmm,
and any way to do that. And so the civil divorce is seen by most tribunals as sort of definitive proof that the marriage is beyond repair.
mm,
Not always, as you probably know from your own
yeah,
practice, but most often that's a sign that the relationship is over. Um, and also the church is cognizant of trying to avoid any potential entanglement between civil law and canon law, that the
mm-hmm,
church wouldn't want to process an annulment and then have a lawyer in a civil divorce try to gain access to church documents to bring into a civil divorce proceeding. So
mm-hmm,
having the annulment happen after the civil divorce is another way to guarantee that.
mm. Okay, okay. Um, okay, so let's see. If if a person's marriage is annulled, does that mean like how do the children respond to that? Like especially like there's so many gray divorces nowadays too. I wonder how the children feel about their parents' marriage being annulled. Does that mean like they're like illegitimate? You know, the children? What does that mean?
Right. So that's a very common misconception that people have is that when a marriage is annulled, that their children become illegitimate. And in the church, in canon law is clear that that's not the case, that the children are always considered legitimate because the people entered into marriage in good faith and they were doing what they thought they were supposed to do. So even if we're a few years later or decades later, and the church goes back and says the marriage is invalid sacramentally, the children are always considered legitimate. Um, how the children themselves perceive the annulment, I think would vary greatly from case to case.
Mm-hmm.
There are some cases I've seen where the children have been encouraging the the parents, maybe usually it's either the mother or the father that I'm involved with, that I see that you're not in a healthy marriage. You should leave. Why are you still with this person? It's not good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Other times it's very difficult on the kids and the
Mm-hmm.
divorce. And then they go through the annulment, which the children rarely, if ever, are part of the annulment process. So
Mm-hmm.
they rarely have to participate. So I don't know how much the children are even aware that their their parent is going through that. But
Yeah.
it could be another sort of psychological emotional blow that now the church, the civil law has said the marriage is divorced, and now the church is saying the marriage never happened. And as kids, how do you understand that? So um, in my role as an advocate, I don't know that I've ever interacted with someone's children. So
Okay.
hopefully the parents um, my hope is that by educating the people who come to me, they can pass that information, that knowledge along to their children and help them better understand what's happening by this process.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. And how about if, I mean, you must have cases where one spouse is very much passionate about getting an annulment, it's very, very meaningful to them, and the other spouse is just not on board.
Mhm.
Like, how does that work? That does the ex-spouse have to participate?
Right. So there are two things that sometimes happen in that scenario. So what happens most often is one person really wants the annulment, the other person is indifferent,
Hmm.
doesn't care. They might even be opposed to it, but they simply don't participate. And the annulment process still moves forward, even if the other party doesn't participate. It can sometimes delay the process because the tribunal has to reach out to them to let them know that this is happening because it impacts them as well and their rights. But if that person simply doesn't want to participate, then the church, the tribunal, will move on with gathering evidence from those who are available, the petitioner and the witnesses. What can happen sometimes is that one party is so opposed to the annulment, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes because they're just trying to be difficult for the other person, that they will oppose the annulment. And they might even hire a canon lawyer like myself to help them defend their marriage and defend against their ex-wife, ex-husband who's now seeking an annulment. Um, and the tribunal tries to mitigate if people are doing it just to be troublesome. And, hopefully an advocate would mitigate that as well. But that sometimes happens.
Hmm. That must be rough. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced something like that?
I have. I've helped a couple of people who wanted, for reasons of faith, they really felt like the marriage was valid, that they did everything they could, and that their ex-spouse was unreasonable in wanting the divorce, and now is still being unreasonable and wanting an annulment. And so I've helped people like that defend their marriage. I think it's important here to point out again that this process is not about winning cases. So
No.
an advocate should never be throwing out every argument possible to win. This is all about seeking the truth. Um, did the marital bond, the marital covenant form or not? So, as an advocate in those types of situations, I'm not going to make make arguments unless there's facts to support that, or
Mm-hmm.
unless the other party is proposing an argument and there are no facts to support that argument.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I see my role even in those cases as helping the tribunal arrive at truth. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
two different people, they have two different perspectives on how the marriage went and how it ended, but how do we get to the truth of what happened between them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be difficult, right? Because I mean, even when I'm in like a couple's session, and I'm working with a couple, I tend to not, I tend to try to stay away from the past because um, I wasn't there and therefore I will never know the truth, right? Like
Yeah.
he said, she said sort of thing. And it's like useless time. But in a civil case like that, yeah, you need to determine the truth. And I guess that's where you go to maybe family, friends, support, like testimonials, like from people.
Right. That's where witness evidence can be
Yeah.
very helpful. Um, Again, a lot of times you get the different parties, the ex-spouses, each has their own version of events, and their
Yeah.
witnesses will sort of line up behind each person. And so it gets difficult to know, well, who's not even necessarily who's telling the truth, but whose perspective of the
Yeah.
relationship is true.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes people will supply other forms of evidence, such as Facebook posts or
Oh, yeah.
photographs, different things that can corroborate certain things that they've
Mm-hmm.
said in their testimony. And I do want to add, in terms of the ex-spouse being involved, that I think it's more important that people know there's never a point where they have to sit in the same room as their ex-spouse in this
Mm.
process.
Mm-hmm.
even if they're interviewed personally by the tribunal, they'll be interviewed, their ex-spouse will be interviewed separately. There's never a court proceeding like we see in civil court where everyone's in the same room. This all happens independently. And it's
Hmm.
also important to know that if someone was truly abused or has reason to be fearful about their ex-spouse and things they might do, there are ways to protect people's identities or even have the tribunal not disclose certain pieces of information to the other party if that's for the
Mm.
to protect the person or even the witness. Uh,
Hmm.
it's not supposed to be done all the time, but in certain cases, if there's reason, the tribunal can do that to protect the safety of those involved.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. Okay. So does everyone who wants an annulment from the church need a canon lawyer then?
So that I think the short answer is no. I think most people go through the annulment process and don't have a canon lawyer, and I think most of the time they are served very well by the people who are there to help them, which is their tribunal staff and usually their local parish, their parish staff, whether it's their pastor, associate pastor, deacon, or whoever's assigned to help them. Because again, the tribunal is there not to simply like adjudicate between this argument versus that argument. The tribunal in the church drawing on like Roman law and more East and more European law systems, the tribunal, the judges are the ones who are gathering the evidence, trying to figure out what is true. And
Hmm.
so they're not just sort of waiting for this party to present the best argument and that party to present their best argument. They're trying to collect the evidence they feel is necessary to come to a decision. And most tribunals that I know of are really pastoral in trying to apply the law and help people in these situations. Um, More locally, they might have very well-intentioned pastors or deacons or whoever, but they're not always the most informed on canon law. So sometimes they
Hmm.
get they don't get the best service there, not because people are trying to misrepresent them. It's just
Hmm.
because people don't have the expertise or the knowledge that they need. So usually those are cases that come to me sometimes on appeal, where they're looking
Mm.
for someone to help them out. So I would say people look for a canon lawyer if they know it's going to be a difficult case. Not every case is as easy as others. If they are apprehensive that their ex-spouse is going to contest the annulment, so they want as much
Mm.
help as they can get to
Mm.
present the best case, get the most evidence. And then again, a lot of times I get people who have gone through the process, they get a negative decision, and then there's an opportunity to appeal the
Mm.
decision. And so then they'll contact me and say, can you help
Mm.
me get an affirmative decision, get an annulment or declaration of nullity granted on appeal?
Okay, interesting. Okay, so most people you feel would just seek the support from their parish, and they would start there, and
Right.
then yeah, they would go through that. But if the decision is not favorable, or maybe if they know that things are getting complicated, then they would seek you out,
Right.
more or
And
less. Okay.
sometimes, right. And sometimes their pastor will tell them that, things are getting complicated or we're
Mm.
having a hard time getting information. Maybe you should hire a canon lawyer. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, and I would always encourage people to start with their local pastor because as much as I try to be pastoral with people and help them, um, at the end of the day, I'm here for a judicial process,
Mm-hmm.
support from their local pastor, spiritually, pastorally, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. So that's always the place to start for people, I think, is going to their local pastor, or even if it's not their local pastor, a pastor in the area that they trust. Because I tell people that all the time when they come to me, that sometimes they're looking around at which canon lawyer would be best for them. That this is obviously a very difficult, very painful process. You're most often going to be asked some intimate personal questions. So you're
Mm.
comfortable with the person, with the people that you're working with, not just that they're competent people, but am I comfortable sharing things with them and receiving help from them?
It's true. Yeah, I think that's an important thing to note. Like, if it's your parish priest that you see every single day, yes, you're supposed to be able to feel comfortable in the confessional with them, et cetera, et cetera. But there's something to be said about like truly a third party, right? I mean, even in my work, I mean, you could have the great aunt ever who's always given excellent relationship advice, but when it comes to like very intimate discussions about your marriage, um, because it could be even that, the great aunt or the priest really, really liked your husband a lot, and could be somewhat biased because of that, right? It's so, I mean, I see that in my work that the power of having a separate confidant in that way, a professional, I can see how that would be very beneficial in your work as well. It's like, I don't know you guys from a hole in the ground, never met you before, completely impartial. Um, yeah, and I'm just gonna go based on the evidence that you're giving me right now. So,
Yeah, sometimes it's based on their capabilities. Someone can be a wonderful priest, a wonderful pastor, but just not have
yeah,
those skills.
yeah,
Uh, Sometimes it's just a personality fit. I'm sure
yeah,
you see your work where you're perfectly competent, you could help these people, but for whatever reason, it just personality-wise, it doesn't click. And
yeah.
so I think people need to know that they have a right to seek out the help that they need. They shouldn't feel compelled to go to their pastor as if he's
Hmm.
the person that can help them through this process.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Okay, so when you think about like how many like what's the percentage of people that seek annulments that are successful at it? Like, is it 90%? Is it 80%?
Yeah, I couldn't, I would feel bad giving a number to
Okay.
that. Um, I think it somewhat varies on the tribunal where they're at. There's some tribunals who have a more, I guess you would use the term rigid philosophy in terms of how to apply the law
Mm,
versus others. But I would say the majority of the people that I work with have been successful at receiving an annulment.
okay. Okay. That's good to know.
It really depends on the case.
Hmm.
And I tell people that there are cases that I see, and I think I don't know how a tribunal would grant an annulment in this one, and they do. And then I see other ones, and I think, well, that should be a fairly simple case, and the tribunal doesn't grant the annulment. So you never really know how, because you're dealing with people, and how is
Hmm.
in this case the judge or the panel of judges, how are they going to interpret the facts?
Hmm.
That's one of the big reasons why I tell people that at times they might need a canon lawyer, because that's one of the things like a canon lawyer can do is once all the evidence is submitted, the canon lawyer has the opportunity to review everything and then write a brief arguing to the tribunal why the annulment should be granted. So, in essence, what I try to do in those situations is lay out the argument and make the judge's job easier so that when
Yeah.
they come to assess everything, they can see, oh yeah, how this easily lines up with what has already been argued by this canon lawyer, this all makes sense to me, which they might have done anyway on their own, because that's what they're supposed to do is to analyze the evidence and see if it fits or not. But if you have someone who's already done the legwork and sort of laid it all out, it makes their job easier.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because you'd even wonder if it makes me think of when my children were taking their driver's test. There'd be like 4 or 5 centers in our city where they could take their test, and it doesn't take long for the within their peer group to share, go to this center, they always pass everybody, sort of thing. You'd
Yeah.
wonder if the same conversations are happening within, the city for people that are getting annulments. Oh, go to that parish, go to that, see that pastor, that priest. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. I think some of that does. I mean, more locally, they might say, well, go to that priest or that pastor. He's much better at it. In terms of the which tribunal, people would have no idea on those kinds of things.
Okay.
It's really only if you're more involved, like I am, and have worked with different tribunals, that you would know that this tribunal has a reputation for being more difficult in terms of getting an
Okay.
this one is has a reputation for being easier. Um, but again, it's not because one tribunal is trying to be harsh. It's because of they're all trying to interpret the law and support Catholic teaching on marriage, but they have different philosophies on how the law should be applied.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. They have different philosophies in terms of how the law should be applied.
Yeah,
But if
on
it's
the on the law, and then what evidence is needed to support the law.
okay, because I'm thinking the law is the law, you know.
Mhm.
So how can there be different perspectives on how the law, like, isn't that why we have law? Like, I mean, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think any lawyer, whether civil or canonical, would tell you that the law does its best to be clear, but it can't address every situation. The law lays out basic principles, and then those basic principles have to be applied into real life situations and circumstances. So when one of the laws, for example, um, in canon law about marriage and the validity of consent is that those who suffer from a psychological defect and are unable to exercise due discretion of judgment are unable to validly consent to marriage. So what comprises a psychological defect? When is someone truly incapable versus just being having it be very difficult for them to exercise discretion of judgment? Those are the kinds of things where one person can interpret that one way and someone can interpret it
Hmm.
differently. And in psychological cases, the tribunal is supposed to get the opinion of experts, but as you probably know, in your field, experts can disagree on the interpretation
Yeah,
of these too.
yeah,
So it
that's
all
true.
comes down to individuals. How do we judge this person, these circumstances, this relationship, and how did it all come together to form or not form a valid marital bond?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, we're kind of coming upon the end of our time here, and so I'm curious, Michael, do you love you do you like your work? Do you love your work? And why?
I don't know if I love my work because you deal with a lot of difficult situations, but I find it very fulfilling because again, my role is to serve as part of a judicial process. But I tell people all the time that while we're going through a judicial process and applying law, I really hope that people find healing from it. And I think the majority of people do, because when you spend time going back and in this process, there's a lot of questions. It makes you really think about what was going on in the past.
Yeah.
And what did you really intend to do when you got married, and why did the marriage fail? And when you're trying to find out the truth of the relationship, I think finding out the truth is very healing to people, to see
Mm-hmm.
this is what happened and this is where I'm
Mm-hmm.
wrong, or this is where, something went wrong. And I think that's very helpful and healing for people. And at the end of the day, I think just brings closure. They've gone through the civil divorce, they've gone through maybe some counseling, whatever, and now they've addressed this with the church and hopefully gotten some pastoral guidance, spiritual guidance
Yeah.
along. And it's really sort of like the last piece to bring closure to this and give them the freedom that they want to move forward and to have a new start in their life, and a lot of times in their faith. And a lot of times they're coming back because they want to renew their faith, and this is a hindrance. And so being able to help people find that freedom, and encounter the Lord in that way is very, very fulfilling.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that's what we all try to be reminded of is the power of reflection, right? And taking the time. I mean, that's why people journal. I mean, their feelings or whatever, but even, you know, those records of your feelings or looking back and maybe looking at old texts or old emails or old, yeah, whatever that might be, looking back at past conversations, it's both healing and also, I think, um, maybe it's preventative in many ways of doing this the wrong way again, right? It's sort of like, in that sense, it's a really good reflection exercise, as painful as it could be. But like you said, it's probably also very healing and also motivating someone to do it differently next time. Um, yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes people enter into this process and they're very confused as to why everything happened. Sometimes it's very clear why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
You said they can look back and see that's how I allowed myself to get into a very bad situation, and they
Right.
can hopefully learn from that moving forward. So
Yeah.
I, again, it's a legal process, but I do hope and think it does provide some healing to people.
Yeah. And I'm just curious too, because I have no idea. So when a person decides that they want to be a lawyer, they want to go into law, is this sort of like one of the different like you can either go civil law, you can go to, real estate law, like canon law, is that how it's laid out or how does that work?
So for people in Canada and the United States, it's really they're seeking out canon law specifically.
Okay.
You first of all, to study canon law, you need some background in theology, because again, canon law is an expression of our theology, the church's theology. So you can't really understand the law unless you know what the church teaches on
Mm,
marriage, sacraments,
yeah.
and all those
Yeah.
things. So people have to have that background already. And then a lot of times they're invited to think about studying canon law. And there's more and more, though, lay people or just people in general getting interested in serving in the church in that way,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that canon law is an area of need in the church, and
Mm-hmm.
that really is a way to minister and help people in some very intimate, very important ways.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can't imagine somebody who's an atheist choosing to go into canon law or something like that. Make their life really difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with, to close up?
I think I would leave them with the encouragement that the annulment process is difficult. It takes time, it takes reflection, but it's worth it. It's not something to avoid. It's something, if you find the right people to support you, that you can do and get through. And because I think a lot of people avoid it thinking it's going to be too costly, it's going to be whatever.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage people to pursue it and not be
Yeah.
afraid of it. And again, make sure you find the right people to support you through the process and know that you can come out better on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. I think that's wonderful. Good advice. Okay, Michael. Well, thanks a lot for agreeing to see me today. Like I said, I
Having
know
me.
you didn't know me from a hole in the ground, but thanks for being very willing to shed some light on this mysterious process called the annulment process.
Sure, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, great. Everyone else, have a very good week, and I'll see you back next week. Thanks again, Michael.
All right, thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember that you can watch the full episode on YouTube, where I plan to hang out the most. Your feedback and suggestions for future guests are incredibly valuable to me, so please don't hesitate to post a comment. You are an integral part of this journey.